Namaskara and welcome to BIC Talks, a podcast brought to you by Bangalore International Centre, where we present conversations that move, inform, and encourage discourse.
So it's a great honor for me to be moderating this conversation. Professor Rehman teaches at Jamia. He's come all the way from Delhi. Right now, he's coming from Bhubaneswar, which I found out recently, a couple of days ago. So he's part of that really small minority of Muslims in Odisha. And we have Aakar for Bangaloreans. He's a resident public intellectual in a way, and, and a very thorough analyst of the actions of the activities of the Hindu right wing. So it's great to have both of you here. Thank you. I'm last night I sat down and prepared a short note about the book. So indulge me as I quickly read through this. Give me 5 minutes. I won't take more of your time, but it'll serve us well as a background for the discussion. So Professor Rehman's book is titled Shikwa-e-Hind, The Political Future of Indian Muslims. The first part of the title is reminiscent of the title of poet and philosopher Muhammad Iqbal's early 20th century poem in Urdu, Shikwa, which is a complaint to Allah on the wretched plight of Muslims. Although Professor Rehman was not inspired by the title of this poem, the coincidental title of Professor Rehman's book, Shikwa-e-Hind, if read as an extension of Iqbal's plaintive appeal, can be translated as the complaint of India. Iqbal's poem was composed during what Professor Mujib calls the first political moment of Indian Muslims that commenced after the mutiny/revolt of 1857. In this first political moment, which extended till 1947, Muslims floundered after it became clear that they had lost political power permanently and turned inward. It was also during this period that they gained modern political consciousness. The triumphal and tragic moment of India's independence and partition marks the inauguration of the second political moment for Indian Muslims, and the highlight of this period was the sacred covenant that the Indian state drew with its religious minorities. The covenant was breached on many occasions, as Professor Rehman writes. But Indian Muslims still held on to the sacredness of this agreement, as in a way it legitimized their inherent identity as citizens and a crucial component of the nation. This moment ran its course till 2014, when the BJP under Prime Minister Narendra Modi's leadership came to power at the center under its own majority. With this, the third political moment of Indian Muslims commenced, where the Hindu right has, with its comprehensive mandates at the center and in various states, galvanized politics and society into taking a sharp and aggressive rightward turn, which has led to an unprecedented and dangerous marginalization of Indian Muslims, a community that numbers more than 200 million today. While the first two political moments are discussed briefly as a prelude to 2014, Professor Rehman focuses intensively on this third political moment in his book and its implication for Indian Muslims. We are currently amid this third political moment, and the book's value lies in bringing together a vast and robust amount of research material to broadly argue that the Hindu right wants the de-Islamization of India. So, Rehman, as a political scientist, he has a longue durée perspective. He breaks this down in a very granular manner and establishes his thesis in a very comprehensive way. He looks at questions such as Indian Muslims' rights to have rights, the banality of violence against Muslims, the hindrances to the development of Indian Muslim women, the transition of Indian Muslim citizenship from a jus soli by birth to a jus sanguinis by descent status of citizenship, and also forefronts the debate on Indian Muslim backwardness. He also, unusually for a book on Indian Muslims, dwells on the cultural and political lives of South Indian Muslims, which he sees as markedly different from that of North India. The book makes for grim reading, and the detailed discussion of the various ways in which Indian Muslims have been disempowered and politically invisibilized under the onslaught of Hindu majoritarianism will certainly make the reader feel that a way out of this despondent situation where Indian Muslims can be potentially treated as equal political citizens of India one day is hopeless. This sort of provides the background of the book, but just as a last comment, a few years after composing his Shikwa, Muhammad Iqbal followed it up with another poem titled Jawab-e-Shikwa, which was supposed to be Allah's response. The stature of this philosopher poet was such that he could respond on Allah's behalf, which caused a consternation among the Islamic clergy at that time. I don't think that Professor Rehman has any misconceptions of inhabiting such a lofty realm, but his last concluding chapter, his Jawab-e-Shikwa in a way, does have a few ideas as to how Indian Muslims can address their intense marginalization and become relevant to secure their rights as Indian citizens and ensure their political future in the country. For without this, as Professor Rahman writes, Indian democracy will remain incurably wounded. Thank you. Thank you for the book, Professor Rahman. Aakar, let's start with you. You've written two books critically interrogating some of the themes that Professor Rahman engages with. So, a few comments from you, your reflection on your reading of the book.
Thanks. Thank you for writing this book, and thank you all for coming. Thank you to BIC. I'll speak to chapters 2 and 3, and then maybe we can speak about his conclusions later. 2 and 3 deal with the subject that Vikhar spoke of, which is Muslims in South India, and also the fact that the violence that we are seeing all around us is new in one way, which is that it is a state imposed. All the decades that I was in newspapering, one had never heard of the term beef lynching. This is a gift that has come to us after 2015, when two BJP states, Maharashtra first, Haryana second, passed laws which criminalized the possession of beef. This has nothing to do with the article in the Constitution which aims to protect livestock. This is purely about beef and the reversal of the burden of proof, which began a series of episodes of violence that has continued. He has documented many of them, for which we are grateful. One thing as a journalist I should point out is that in a newsroom, when something keeps coming in the same format regularly, it tends to be demoted. It starts off on the front page, then it goes inside, it goes further in. At some point, it becomes what is called a brief, that it is not worthy of being reported in full. I think that is what has happened with lynching, that the violence that is driven through law and allowed to happen in society has become normalized. One remarkable part of these laws, and these are all laws in the north of India. We in Karnataka are trying our best to become like the north. Fortunately for us, we don't have the kind of momentum in politics that the north has. There are parts of India, Gujarat being the obvious one, where though it's democratic, it's a one-party state. So that one party tends to dominate every poll from local to a national. And so we are in some sense fortunate that we, meaning the people of the South, have not had the opportunity to participate in this in the way that our compatriots in northern India have. The striking part of the law, which is not new, a lot of this comes to us from the Congress, and we should accept that this is not something that began after 2014, justifies and glorifies vigilantism. So if stopping a truck is done in good faith, these are the words in many of the laws, some of the laws are not written in English. So in Madhya Pradesh especially, many of the laws are written only in Hindi. And so then you have to assume what it means in the translation. And so vigilantes have been given the power to be able to intrude into the personal lives of people, most of them Muslim, obviously. And then beginning with that, the violence comes. We've seen videos of people using boards with nails to block trucks to take them off the highway. Violence leading to deaths doesn't get the kind of response that we saw in 2015 and 16 when the first murders happened in northern India, Akhlaq, and so on. The other thing that, and there are many other laws. I think that 2015 is a beginning because that's when a sort of format is put in place on love jihad. So these are again laws. The first law comes to us in 2018, Uttarakhand, and then there are 7 BJP states which follow suit. Identical phrasing for the most part. Two things are striking. One is in many of the laws, including in UP, conversion to ancestral faith is not counted as being conversion, and that is left undefined. What it means for the most part, as far as we understand it, is that if somebody were to convert to Hinduism, that would not be counted as being conversion. If you were to convert to another faith, then you would have to go through the law. The other important part in this law is that an adult woman who testifies to the state that she has converted of free volition, that testimony is insufficient evidence for the state. It is for the person she's marrying and the family she's marrying into that need to demonstrate that there was no coercion. And as some of you may know, the word coercion in Indian law is used in quite an unusual way. There is a Supreme Court judgment from the 70s, which says, it's called Stanislaus versus State of Madhya Pradesh, which says that if I were to induce somebody with promise of an afterlife, that would count as being coercion. That would count as being physically using material elements such as money to try and coerce them to change their faith. So my saying that the kingdom is heaven is going to come if you believe in this becomes coercion. Essentially, what has happened is that we have taken away from Christians the right to propagate, a right they specifically asked for, a right that was specifically given to them from Article 25. But that happened, as I said, during the Congress period. Post 2015, we have seen a series of laws where we are doing this to our largest minority. Doing it for the most part in the north of India. I think that one of the things, and I think this book is quite important because of the fact that it looks at what the possibilities are, the last chapter, is that the widening of the gap between the north and the south on things like the economy, on things like the access into whatever we might call the middle class, has also been reflected in a widening in how we see the nation. And I think North Indians, led by Gujaratis, have become a particular, have taken on a very fierce nationalism that is aimed inwards at our own people. And the problem, of course, is that in the Weimar Republic, Jews were less than 1% of the population. In China, the Uyghur are 1% of the population. We have 200 million Muslims. We cannot damage them substantially without damaging ourselves. And it is for this reason that I think that non-Muslims in particular should read this.
Thank you for that, Aakar. Your comments about lynching in North India reminded me that well before lynchings became common in North India, they were happening quite frequently in coastal Karnataka. Where cow vigilantes were targeting Muslims. And I've reported about some of these incidents. I think the first incident took place in 2006, where a cow transporter. So, well, coastal Karnataka, that's another very interesting zone, which Professor Rehman actually discusses briefly. Professor Rehman, Do you want to respond to what Aakar has said and open up a space for a discussion by discussing some of the themes that perhaps I've missed in my introductory comment?
It's possible that in a vast and complex country like ours, lynching might have happened prior to Akhlaq case. But there is a significant difference, which is that you never saw lawmakers garlanding perpetrators. Well educated, coming from very distinguished family, doing all of that about it. The sort of state legitimacy, state complicity, and after that, even the way it had happened. That's in that sense, the pattern is significantly different under the majoritarian regime and what was happening prior to that. Not that I'm condoning whatever. Now, coming to, I'll just briefly lay out the major contours of the argument. Indian Muslims, as all of us know, are fairly a significant number, which is, in my assessment, extrapolation, roughly around 240 million or so. Although in my book I said about 200 million, which is more than the population of Great Britain and Germany, France or Germany, or Egypt, Jordan, Saudi Arabia, all 3-4 major Muslim countries you put together, the number would be still less than what Muslims are. Now imagine for a second that India was undivided. What would have been the population of Muslims today? In my calculation, which is the Muslim population of Pakistan, Muslim population of Bangladesh, then Muslim population diaspora, if you put all of them together, it would be roughly around or close to 750 million or so, or 7 million, anywhere. So think of a united India and imagine what could have been the politics of this country, with 800 plus million of Hindus and 700 around Muslims. The story would have been vastly different. The point I want to make is this, that Muslim community is the most prominent victim of partition today about it, and they are taking the blame for that part. In India, and all the discussions that has been going on in this country concerning Muslims, it looks at Muslims as a religious minority for obvious reason, that its number is roughly around 15% or so. I have a mild, rather strong disagreement from that analysis. So everything that is happening in India today is being presented as acts of minority violation. They are the evidences of minority violation. Considering the fact that almost every aspect of Muslim life is subjected to scrutiny by the state, by other organizations which are part of state, including media, in such an aggressive, systematic manner. What they eat, how they dress, azan, kabristan, to almost everything, to Waqf land, almost everything, and the mosque and temple and all these things that we hear about. So I argue what is unfolding in India is indeed not the violation of minority rights. It is a concerted effort for what I call the de-Islamization process. Muslim no more, Islam no more. That seems to be driving the politics of this ideological warfare that we are experiencing today in this country. Some of the evidences are very prominent, and all of you know that. For instance, exclusion of Muslims from Citizenship Act, all of that. So that's where my analysis is different from others. The second point I wanted to make is this: the book exclusively focuses on, not on future, but on political future of Indian Muslims. And I draw a sharp distinction between the two. And this is something that a lot of commentators or reviewers often fail to recognize. What is the difference? Concerns of future of Indian Muslims has always been there, and there are a lot of important works on this particular subject. Say a book by S. Abid Hussain called The Destiny of Indian Muslims, or other scholars like Rafiq Jakaria, What Went Wrong with Muslims, or Musirul Hassan. A lot of other people have written about it directly or indirectly. Even the backwardness question, which is systematically analyzed, particularly after such a report, also indirectly addresses the economic future of the country, Muslim community. That's what it is about. So I try to argue that there is economic future, there is cultural future, there is political future. It is the political future which is very central and preeminent, because all the concerns that you have concerning economic future and cultural future becomes inconsequential if your political future is not ensured. That is the theoretical argument I've tried to argue. So what do I mean by political future? I mean the place of Muslims in Indian polity, right, in terms of rights, where they stand. A couple of years ago, Mohan Bhagwat, the chief of RSS, organized a 3-day meeting in which diplomats from 60 countries were invited primarily to explain the primary goals and objectives and vision of RSS for India, and why RSS should not be compared with other organizations such as ISI and others. Because Rahul Gandhi, who on a tour to Europe on one of those rare occasions said some things saying comparing ISI with RSS, and this was an attempt to clarify that. During those discussions, Mr. Bhagwat said, some journalist asked the question, what about Muslims? Do they have a place? So he said, Hindutva has a place for Muslims, and Muslims have a place in Hindutva polity. The question is that it is not important just to say that Muslims have a place in Hindutva polity, because Dalits have been the part of Indian society for years. They always had a place. The real question is what kind of place that they have in the polity. Are they equal? Do they deserve or are treated with the same dignity that the others are? So that's the central question that I try to elaborate on. So I have a chapter which I have titled deliberately which again a lot of commentators often missed it, called Right to Have Rights, drawing a phrase from Hannah Arendt's work. So basically the book argues that Muslims are equal and they deserve equal rights. Now, just because there was a Pakistan, just because there is XYZ terror and XYZ things happening, so the entire community should not be pushed aside and said, you should not have any rights because you are so bad or you're so dangerous. No. So the whole project of demonization that we hear about in different languages is essentially an attempt, in my view, to build an ecosystem where people will begin to say, oh, these are all such awful people. Why should they have rights? So let them die. Out of it, So that's what it is about. So I try to make a case for equality, and that's what I think almost all Muslims aspire for. That if there is a law, let that law be equal for others as well as for us. If there is bulldozing of houses, let that be for all of them, not just for one community or for Muslims. Historically, I'll just conclude. We are, as a country, in fact, which is most of us would agree that that's not an adequate concept to explain or describe a society like ours. It's a continent, vast. It's a civilization. So historically, if we will think deeply, there is one thing that this civilization has always struggled to achieve, which is equality. Equality between gender, equality between castes, equality between religion. So Muslim question that we come across today is a reflection of that particular struggle. So for the first time in 1947, we had this wonderful constitution, the first significant document that we had where equality was promised. Prior to that, there is no evidence of any document where everyone is being argued or respected or given equal status. So there is a paradigm shift that we are witnessing today with respect to that, which is what, basically the entire narrative in and around that, a part of it. So you must have come across a slogan made by one famous chief minister of our country, Batoge to Katoge, which was used in a slightly different way in Maharashtra elections by various prominent leaders. If you think deeply, what does it mean? Right? It appears to be a very, very divisive slogan. It is a very divisive slogan, although it appeals for fraternity. But in its appeal for fraternity, does it address the question of equality? Is it saying that the Thakurs and Dalits are equal? Answer is no. What it is trying to do is to evade that particular question and says that there could be fraternity without addressing equality, which is never possible, even if you go to the French Revolution and all of that. You need to have equality in order to achieve substantive fraternity. You cannot have substantive fraternity unless human beings treat each other or they have equal rights. Last one line is this: the question of representation. We live at a time when we have a person of Indian heritage, Hindu heritage, served as the Prime Minister of Britain. We have a person of Hindu heritage, almost came close to becoming the President of America. We have one who is holding a significant position, Anita, in Canada, where Indians are immigrants, and now we have the new rock star of Democratic Party, Joran Mamdani. So all these people have been there for last, say, 50 years, 70 years. They have found space to represent, stand for. Here, Muslim community are here for thousands of years. A large number of them obviously came from Hindu stock. And this is neither shameful nor disgraceful, because if you examine, Islam happens to be the youngest Abrahamic religion, along with Judaism and Christianity. And almost every Muslim, including Prophet, was something else before they embraced Islam. So it's not something that is a unique Indian phenomenon. Right? They were Christians, they were Jews, or there was something else a part of it. So here, Muslim cannot be the MLA or MP. That has been the deliberate strategy of a particular political party that you know all of. Now, why representation matters? The argument is that all these minorities are nice and happy here because we are nice people, and for thousands of years they've been living here. There is a mosque standing in Kerala for 1,000 years. We are nice people. Why do you need rights? Why do you want to represent yourself? We know your problem. The argument is very similar to what generally you hear from people who advocate for patriarchy. My mother is a woman, my wife is a woman, my sister is a woman. So I know a woman's rights, so why the hell that women should come and do this? Right? So we know that from American Revolution that taxation without representation is colonialism. So what is, in certain sense, is unfolding is an attempt to colonize the whole community in a very sophisticated manner by denying them political voice, by denying them representation. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Rehman. There are many sort of directions where the discussion could go. But Aakar, do you want to dwell on what it means if what the success of the Hindu Rashtra project means? What does it mean to de-Islamize or Muslims no more? Because recently I was in coastal Karnataka, I was talking to a former BJP MLC, and he said, well, we can't really throw 200 million Muslims out of the country. Yes, so they better listen to us. So I want you to sort of tell me what you think, what it means.
So the modern state is concerned with two things. The first is who gets to be in charge. The second is what is to be the basis of law. And most modern states are able to conclude their journey to answer these two questions through constitutional secularism. That's the norm. That's the way that the modern world looks at a nation. Who gets to be in charge? The representatives who have been elected by the people. What is to be the basis of law? A pluralist constitution. So those are the two things. When we want to diverge from it, it presents a series of problems. So let me take 4 states. We'll take four states: Iran, Pakistan, Nepal, and India. Iran was able to complete the project. Who gets to be in charge? The Irani clergy have a hierarchy with the grand ayatollahs sitting right on top, and you've got the various clerics of what is called 12er Shiism, and there is more or less a consensus on how the law is to be interpreted. So that's taken care of. That when Khomeini dies, a group of clerics get together, put a Khamenei in charge. Basis of law, once again, a 12er Shiism. You go back there, you look at what should be the punishment for, say, theft, and it is to be the amputation of the hand at the wrist. Second, the amputation of the foot, and so on. So they've developed machines that can do that. Pakistan was not able to complete the project, and the reason for that is that Pakistan is as diverse a community of Muslims as we are. So they do have a majority of Sunnis, and within those Sunnis, they do have a majority of people who are from who are called Hanfis. But even within them, there is no hierarchy. There is nobody who is an imam or somebody like Bukhari in Delhi who's able to determine what should happen or not happen in, say, Bangalore. So they didn't have that vertical hierarchy that the 12er Shia had. Even within the Shias, we've got the Gujarati Shias who are Sevener. Even within the Sevener, there are splits between the Bohras and the Khojas and so on. So it's not possible. So who would be in charge? They were not able to answer the question. What is to be the basis in law? They were not able to answer the question. In 1954, they had a commission, a Munir, which looked at what is to be the basis of law. It was not able to conclude. It spoke to all of the clerics and said that there's too much confusion here. Nepal was till 2008 a Hindu Rashtra. It had two elements of the Hindu Rashtra in it. First, executive authority would flow from a Kshatriya king, that a born Kshatriya, Janayudhari, would be the head of government. That was one aspect. The second aspect was in the king of this Kshatriya court, Chetri, the Chetri dynasty, there would be a Brahmin called the Mool Purohit who would give advice to the king on how the court was to be governed. Those were the only two elements that they could introduce into the Hindu state. What remained was how do you accommodate caste? You have accommodated caste in two ways, through who will rule and who will be the advisor. But who has the right to learn? Do women have the right to learn? They didn't go there. Nepal did not go there because the texts tell you that they can't, or at least some texts tell you that they can't. India has an even deeper problem than Nepal did. Nepal is no longer a Hindu Rashtra, and now it is as democratic and secular as we are. India doesn't have a hereditary king. We don't even have the primary element that the Nepalis had. the end state of the Hindu Rashtra is more of the same for this reason. We will not be able to do what Iran did. We will not be able to do and fail as Pakistan did. We will not be able to do and stop as Nepal did. We will just continue doing this. Legislating law that persecutes minorities, not looking at anything in terms of damage. I'll just take a couple of more minutes. I'll try and sort of expand what I mean. If we look at the problems of the subcontinent according to Hindutva, partition, cross-border terrorism, multi-faith populations, all of those problems in exactly the same form affect the ASEAN nations. Singapore was partitioned from Malaysia. The state of Indonesia sent soldiers in Mufti to conduct bombings in Singapore, for which they were convicted and hanged. It is as multi-faith a community of people as we are. You've got the Buddhists in the top 4 nations, starting from Burma, going up to Laos and so on. You've got Christians in the Philippines. You've got the large Muslim populations of Malaysia and of Indonesia. But they trade. It's the largest trading bloc with China. They have exactly the same problems we do. They don't like one another. Singaporeans and Malaysians they still have the animosity of partition. Singapore still, Lee Kuan Yew went to Indonesia. He went to the graves of the 2 soldiers that he had convicted and hanged, and he put flowers on their graves to try and move on. We have exactly the same. We don't trade. You can't travel in South Asia. You can't trade in South Asia because we have refused to move on from the same problems that the rest of the world has. Unless we sort that out, unless we are able to move on, we will not be able to get out of this doing the same thing over and over again, which will affect not only the way that the state has been damaged and society has been damaged, as this book shows, but also the way in which the economy can never progress. You cannot, on your own, remove yourself from the subcontinent and say, I will grow and I'll let the others be condemned to wherever they are.
Thank you, Aakar. The burden of history weighs heavily on Indian Muslims, particularly, as the other experiences and examples also showed. Professor Rehman, I wanted to ask you, so even in your introductory comment, you talked about caste. So you try to make an argument in your book that it's not merely majoritarian Hinduism versus minority Muslims. One argument that you make is now it's the state against Muslims, but another argument that you make is it's dominant caste Hindus versus Muslims. I'm a little I'm unconvinced. This argument would have been valid, say, 20 years ago, 25 years ago, 30 years ago, that the BJP has strategically baatenge to katenge. That is one example, right? It has transcended, at least in terms of people who go and vote for it, right? It has transcended this. Once upon a time, it was the Brahmin Banya party. So I want to, but you still argue that this framework remains relevant. So I want your response on this.
Well, that's another way that I look at this whole development. The argument I make.
It's on.
Yeah, the argument I make here is this, that if you simply say that this is a Hindu-Muslim problem, then you are not going to understand in all its dimensions what the real problem is. Because to understand Hindu society, you have to understand the caste. And we all know that the dominant caste control the levers of power. Now, when people talk about whatever is happening in India, they say, oh, the government is BJP, oh, the media is BJP, oh, the diaspora is BJP. Everybody has become Hindutva-vadi. I keep hearing from my liberal friends, Mujib, I'm the only one left. All my relatives have become Modi supporters. and all of it. They're all upper caste people, people coming from top 10, this thing about it. So I try to argue that it is, then you have to ask that if you're saying media has become pro-BJP or BJP or Modi Vakt or Godi media, who these people are, what's their caste background? What's the caste background of diaspora, right? So, or for that matter, corporate, right? In my earlier book of Rise of Saffron Power, I have this hypothetical thing that had Mr. Modi been, and if you were born in, say, Pondicherry or Tripura, or you would have struggled to become member of parliament. It's because he came from Gujarat and the corporate. And I remember Aakar had a piece in Times of India mentioning about all top corporates and how he got it about it. He gave a huge advantage to him to negotiate and become the Prime Minister of India. So the point I wanted to make is this, that we were never a perfectly secular society. Let's be honest. We all grew up in an imperfectly secular society, tolerant society. I grew up with a lot of conservative people, extremely conservative, but they're not going to lynch me. They're not going to burn my house down. Right? They'll be nice. They'll not say, oh, if you are invited, don't drink water there, or, they will not marry their daughter to one Muslim gentleman, bit about of it, they're otherwise, but they're not going to be as violent as we have seen in all this. Right? Now, this imperfect society had remained broadly secular or tolerant until, say, mid-80s or so, or 90s, or early 90s, because the dominant upper caste somehow or other believed that this is okay and working. Now, the dominant upper caste has somehow or other, they all have not become Hindutva-badi, but some of them have become quite indifferent. They're not really serious about the secular project. And there are internal factors and there are external factors. So for instance, 9/11, Islamophobia, all of them created, the diaspora definitely was affected in a deep way regarding who Muslims are and all of that about it. So I argue that if you simply look at it as Hindu-Muslim thing, then you are stuck with the old framework and you might not be able to understand what exactly has happened. Now that particular dominant caste has shifted its loyalty to Hindu right, tacitly or otherwise. Okay? It certainly has become a massive supporter of its electoral base and ideological campaign, consciously or subconsciously. And I quote that particular work, which is the most important work done by Amrita Basu, where she studied 4 states, Gujarat, Himachal Pradesh, Rajasthan, and Uttar Pradesh, and arrived at this conclusion: wherever upper castes have supported BJP, the anti-Muslim violence. It's a very empirically rooted work. So it's from that.
Thank you. I mean, we need to probe this further, I think, in your book, because there's a certain sense then that the lower caste, lower in quotes, don't have that agency there. I mean, they're being led by the upper caste. Because if you see how the BJP works, it works very strategically. Perhaps it's an upper caste project. But now this, the demonization of the Muslim has pervaded down the ranks as well. So it's being led by the lower caste. I mean, I'll just give you one example. This is something that I worked on. How the BJP lures the ST community, tribal community. So there is a temple in, now it's Vijayanagara district, across the river from Hampi, Nanegundi. So it's an Hanuman temple. So there are many sites all over India that claim to be all over South India that claim to be the birthplace of Hanuman. But when Basuraj Bommai became the chief minister, there was a concerted campaign to privilege to make it the official birthplace of Hanuman. And Hanuman, as you know, is the favored deity of the STs. And that region is heavily populated by the ST community. So the project succeeded fairly well. And so I'm just trying to say that there is a limit to that argument also. Perhaps it was valid earlier. But anyway, maybe it will come up in Q&A.
Yeah, this, the basic project of Hindu right, which we all know, is that to consolidate Hindu community across caste line. And what you said, I completely agree with you. And there are important works. For instance, Badrinaran has a book called Fascinating Hindutva, where he has this field work in entire Uttar Pradesh, and so that how they are reaching out and all of that. So Hindu right has been, I'm broadly talking about Hindu right in the sense you all know the organizations that I'm mentioning about. So they have been very careful about it. They have learned a lot of things from other organizations. Say, for instance, how to counter the missionary activities in tribal. So in that sense, there is an effort in that part of it. But what I'm trying to say is this: to understand why such a sudden shift that has taken place in society, where we have this semblance of tolerance, and why that has disappeared. Why is it that we always had stories of famous people not finding accommodation in Bombay, and all of that about it. But those are all very different kind of things than the sort of patterns and organized way that's been happening. That's the point. Yeah.
Aakar, Professor Rehman talks about the political invisibilization of the Muslim. So in Karnataka, it's very evident. You know it very well. We have a population, Muslims constitute, say, between 12 and 13% of the population here, similar to the Lingayat population in the state. But Lingayats have more than 50 MLAs, Muslims have 9 MLAs. And the Muslim community supported the Congress sort of as a solid block in the 2023 elections. 100%, let's say 90 to 100%. And what do they get in return? 9 MLAs and 2 ministers. Lingayats, say between 20 and 30% of the Lingayats have supported the Congress. What do they get in return? 50 MLAs divided across Congress and the BJP and 8 ministerships. So my question is, how, when Professor Rehman talks about the political future of Muslims, he's increasingly, the Muslim is becoming a political untouchable. The argument is that a Muslim candidate cannot contest in a constituency which has less than, say, 50% of Muslim voters. So, very practically, what is the role of the opposition? They cannot forefront a Muslim question because they're perceived to be anti-Hindu. So how does political representation increase? Because everything stems from that.
So it will not increase so long as the question being debated is framed by the BJP, which is that this is the kind of nationalism we want, and any divergence from it is a treachery. So long as that is the primary question that the voter is asked to answer, there will be a problem. We should expect that the opposition, including the Congress, will be pragmatic. The people giving out the tickets will always assume rightly that the Muslims, because they are in defensive posture, will vote for them. Does it make sense for them then to not give a ticket to a community that might add on to the votes of the Muslims? I think that it makes sense for them to do that.
Sorry, I didn't.
If you have 5 people who are voting, one of those people is definitely going to vote for you. That is the Muslim community. Would you rather give another person from that community a ticket or give it to somebody else to broaden your coalition? Thus, the pragmatic way of looking at it would be to try and go after the other. So I think the assumption should be that so long as politics is communalized, it will always be the case that Muslims will not have the kind of representation that they do, because the basis of asking for the vote is community. You're not saying this on the basis of the fact that I can legislate good law or I can give good governance. I'm being asked to vote for you purely on the fact that you come from this community. And by this community, I meant you don't come from the Muslim community. So long as that remains the central facet of our politics, so long as the BJP remains dominant, it's happened in Gujarat, where the Congress doesn't feel the need to broaden the number of ticket holders who are Muslims, because it feels that they will vote for us in any case. So it's only in those parts, like you say, the ghettos of Ahmedabad, where they get a ticket where they have 48-50% representation, where they can win. But as long as this remains a country where nationalism is inward facing, Hitler's Nationalism was outward facing. I'll conquer Poland, I'll conquer Czechoslovakia, I'll take over France. We don't have any such ambition. When the cabinet meets in India or when the RSS meets in Nagpur, they are not saying we'll go and take over China, we'll go and take over Tibet, we'll go. No. How do I screw over Muslims more efficiently through law, through policy, through exclusion? That is what we are focused on. And as long as our politics remains focused on that, we should assume that this level of lack of representation will actually continue.
Thank you for that, Aakar. Professor Rehman, these three political moments that you talk about. So the first political moment is post 1857 mutiny, when Muslims overwhelmingly realize that they've lost political power permanently. So from my recollection of my own reading of that history of that period, so they turned inward, right? And later, as they became politically conscious, pan-Islamism became a major issue. Indian Muslims began to support issues of pan-Islamism. So support for the Ottoman Caliphate, for instance. So now you argue somewhere towards the end of your book that the situation of the Indian Muslim is similar. Of course, you point out the differences as well, but in terms of its despondency, the situation is similar. So this is a tricky question that I'm posing to you, and you'll have to think carefully about it.
Yeah.
Why are Indian Muslims not getting radicalized then? Because I'd like to think that in the state of siege that a lot of them live in, the temptation, there is certainly an increased religiosity. Anecdotally, it can be observed, right? But why aren't they getting radicalized? I mean, there's an inverse way of posing it, but
Straightforward answer is that the answer is that why you are not radicalized. Why don't you ask this question to yourself? So
that's a smart response.
No. Let me just come back and give the broader this small clarification with this that formulation. In my book, I also argue that Muslim identity is a historically dense identity. It's not like minorities like Indian diaspora in the United States, for instance. So, if there is an Indian Muslim, so there is somebody who is going to remember Babur or Aurangzeb, and there is somebody who is remembering Shah Rukh Khan, right, or APJ Kalam, right? So, in that sense, if you compare to other minorities in India, they do not have that kind of density in history. And that is something that a lot of secularists often say, well, we have this wonderful constitution, 15th of August, 1947, let's forget about everything that happened before. Some have forgotten it, but there are others who don't want to forget all those things. So they want to come back and ask those uncomfortable, unpleasant questions and wanted to play politics around that, right? So that's where the ideological struggle takes place. So what do I mean by political movement? It's actually a concept I borrowed from a historian from Princeton, Stephen Koronek, who used a book on American politics in a similar way. In 1857, what happened is not that Muslims were out of political power. The so-called Muslim power or Mughal power, gone forever. And that realization came to a lot of Muslims who were concerned about Muslim community. The Muslim community pays a huge, huge price. And I don't think there is an adequate documentation of the Muslim suffering and resistance at that point of time that has happened, whether in Delhi and elsewhere. You read some of the history books of that point of time, you come across, but it's far more brutal, far more worse than even what we see in Gaza. If you'll ask me what is going on in Gaza, probably might have happened at that point of time during the vengeance through which the colonial state came back to take down Muslims and Muslim elites all over it. So there was a paradigm shift in Muslim community in terms of thinking. A vast number of Muslim elites were reluctant to go to English schools because they all grew up with Persian language, because they thought these guys are interested to convert us into Christianity. I have quoted some of them. So that led to Muslim, educational backwardness and all of it.
So there were two responses that happened. There was a response that came from Sir Syed Ahmad Khan through Aligarh University, that this is how we have to, and Oxford, we get modernized and take degrees and all of it. And there was a conservative response or religious response that came from Deoband school, that, well, if we're Muslim, we should know the Muslim way of life, or how to offer prayer, what happens if people die, how to conduct Rosa and Muharram and all that stuff about it. So Deoband is all about that. And that was the reason why they never wanted state funding. Madrasa didn't want state funding because they suspected the moment they'll have state funding, then the state would begin to, come out with its own agenda, what to teach, what not to teach, which is what is happening today. And we saw that. The reason why Aligarh was funded by the state, and there was a massive resistance for the anti-colonial movement. And Professor Ram Gua is there about Gandhi's reaction to that, and why Gandhi decided to set up Jamia Millia Islamia. So that's the story. The second point is this, I wanted to say, is this, again, another paradigm shift that happened in 1947. Muslims were confused. There are a lot of Muslims who wanted to go to Pakistan and came back. And because they were not too sure how they will be treated in India. So the constitution ensured equality, right? So there was a paradigm shift again. Despite partition, Pakistan and all of that, a lot of things happened at that time. So similarly, a paradigm shift is happening today. But still the answer is not clear. There is no answer from the Muslim community, right? I would like to connect here. Maybe you are suggesting that, why should not Muslim then get radicalized if this is what is happening about it? So there is no clarity at this point. There is a lot of confusion. I was in that audience where there was a huge number of Muslims who were there. They were asking similar kind of questions. There is a considerable amount of confusion. We talk to people, they would all say all kinds of things. How to deal with it, what's wrong and what's wrong about it. So now the pan-Islamic question. Well, I don't think, my reading of Khilafat, is very different. There is a global connection as an Islam and religion and part of it. If you ask me, Muslims today is far more globalized as they were before, or Hindus today are far more globalized as they were before compared to, because of the various reasons. One among them is there is globalization process that is going on. People are moving and all of it. So today's Muslims are also going around and all of that. But are they falling back on some kind of a global, because that is completely destroyed. The so-called Ottoman, that kind of architecture or geopolitics of that time and today's geopolitics, very different. My favorite example is, when Kandhamal happened, the anti-Christian violence in 2008 in Odisha, Condoleezza Rice visited India and took a special appointment with L.K. Advani just to ask about Kandhamal. What happened to Christians? What is happening? Dr. Manmohan Singh paid a visit to US, stopped in Paris at a meeting with Sarkozy. Sarkozy asked Manmohan, what is going on against Christians in this country? Global Muslim leaders, they are not concerned about what is going on among Indian Muslims. The Prince of Saudi Arabia came for the Republic Day function, landed in this his famous plane and went there and went back. He didn't bother even to visit Jama Masjid. So there is no global concern as such, in a way that an understanding or allegiance of that kind. But we do see some minor reverberations. Past few days you must have noticed Khomeini's photograph appearing in various places and been taken down in India. But that's a Shia loyalty. Shia community has a loyalty to this part of it. So pan-Islamism of that kind does not exist. And it is very unlikely to exist given the kind of politics that takes place in Middle East and in the so-called Muslim world. That's why the Muslim world is the most committed and sincere entity in terms of honoring our Prime Minister. 6 great highest honor had come to the Prime Minister from the Muslim countries. Now people ask me that, well, how can you say that, there are so many anti-Muslim things going on? So clearly, the leader has 2 policies, one for the Muslim world, another for the Indian Muslims. So that's where we are.
But Aakar, can I ask you one last question? So there was a professor of political science in Mysore called Professor Muzaffar Asadi, who passed away earlier this year. So he argued, and I've written about this, I've interviewed him, that Muslims need to embrace their caste identities, whatever that means. So now with forthcoming, we've seen some affirmative action, affirmative moves towards reservation for Muslims in South Indian states on the basis of their social position, right? So now with the forthcoming caste census, should Muslims think about emphasizing their dormant caste identities? In some cases, they are very evident, but in other cases, they're dormant.
If they don't, they will not benefit from reservations under the OBC section. He's written at length about the Sachar Committee report, which recommends, as all right-thinking people should, that the reservations meant for the scheduled castes and scheduled tribes should both be extended to all communities, including Muslims. Scheduled tribes is, so you have, Kashmiri tribals who do benefit from it. Scheduled castes are not. They are specifically excluded. But OBCs are, because of Mandal. If you come from a particular community that works in the hierarchy of the caste system, cobbler, say, or you're making tablas and you're working with leather, if you de-emphasize that, you will not have the opportunity that you might otherwise in the OBC list. And I think that it's important, from my point of view, I don't presume to speak for Muslims, that if they were to choose not to do that, and this is obviously not something that the community will decide, but individual families, when the census, a person comes home, if they de-emphasize that part of their identity, they stand a chance to not get the benefits of being in the OBC community.
You have been listening to BIC Talks by Bangalore International Centre. If you liked what you heard, do follow us on social media. Keep up with our programming by signing up for our mailer on the website, or leave us a review on Apple Podcast or iTunes. The crew that makes these podcasts possible is S. Sarvana Raj and Ranjit Kumar on sound supervision and production. Artwork is designed by Chandani Venkataraman of Crisscross Design Studio. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel on your favorite podcast platform. It can also be accessed on our website, bangaloreinternationalcentre.org. This is Sunaina Jain signing off on behalf of everyone at BIC.